Thanks everybody for being here today. I really appreciate your time. We're going to talk through some more details of our residential zoning districts, particularly as it relates to neighborhood one. We've got some cool new ideas that's will be new to some of the tools that we've used in the past. And I just want to reiterate the importance of this group as being a sounding board for new ideas. We want to hear you're living in the community, you're working in the community, and really want to hear your perspectives. And so looking forward to hearing what your thoughts are. And I think we'll have some really good discussion today. I also would like to welcome some new members, but I'm going to turn it over to Tony to give some opening remarks and to introduce those new members formally. So again, thank you all. And I really look forward to hearing your perspectives today.
Thank you, Allison. Can everybody see and hear me? I can't see myself, so I just want to make sure. Can you all see me?
You may have your camera on.
We can't see you, Tony. We can hear you.
Camera's flipped around.
We see your furniture.
Oh, okay. How about now?
No.
Nope, still the carpet. Very nice carpet.
There you go.
Beautiful.
Ah, super. Hello, Tony.
We good now?
Yes.
All right. Thanks for bearing with me on that. Well, I want to thank everybody as well. I want to welcome
Tony, we're having an audio problem with your microphone.
New member so can you hear me at all?
Yes, off and on.
Great. Well, I'm unmuted, so I'm not sure what to do.
No, go ahead.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Now we can.
Super. Well, I want to welcome Marjorie Parker, who I know is interested in joining, and she represents the Hidden Valley neighborhood. I also want to thank Maria Anderson of Hidden Valley and Carmela Jarvie from the Shamrock Drive neighborhood area, who have had to step down, but appreciate so much their service to this group. And we couldn't do it without all the good folks on this group. And we know life is going to happen and people will come and go, and that's just part of life. But we want to thank everybody so much, and thank you all specifically for your service. And of course, welcome Marjorie. So otherwise, I just want to mention how excited I'm getting, even more excited about all that's going on here. And these are exciting times in Charlotte. Our effort with this UDO is going on in parallel to the 2040 plan effort. And some of you may have heard Taiwo and Mayor Pro Tem were on Charlotte Talks this morning about that. And then of course there's the Charlotte Moves Task Force. The COG is doing a regional Connect Beyond process. There's a process regarding I-77 that the MPO is initiating called Beyond 77. The Charlotte Business Alliance is doing a string of webinars about transportation and infrastructure. Wearing my NCDOT hat, I'm involved in the NC First Commission, which meets tomorrow actually, and is looking hard at transportation infrastructure and funding for that. So there's just a lot of exciting things going on, and you all are, a huge part of that. And so again, I want to thank you. And this is a huge opportunity for Charlotte to really, with this UDO, be an example to the whole country of forward-thinking, inclusive processing of this new ordinance and the product that we're going to come out with. And I've said this for years, because our process is so strong, which you all are a key part of. You know, it's inclusive, it's rigorous, it's transparent, and we're all collaborating and working together. And I think that will make the end result very good for Charlotte and be a great example for everybody everywhere. So thank you so much for what you do. So I'll turn it back over, Laura, to you and your team.
Thank you. I'll pick it up from here, Tony. The primary topic for today's meeting will be a continuation of our discussion on our residential zoning districts, particularly the neighborhood 1 or N1 as we typically call it, zoning districts. You've seen some of these at the last meeting, but you're going to be seeing some new ideas today, and some we'll expand on some of the information we provided at the last meeting. And as usual, this meeting is being recorded, and there will be a video recording of the meeting uploaded to our YouTube page, hopefully in the next 2 or 3 days, business days. So once that's done, we will try to get a reminder email out to everybody to let you know that it is uploaded and where you can go to see it. And similar to last month's meeting, we will take questions either by having you type a comment or question into the chat box, or by raising your hand, and periodically we will try to stop and recognize hands, and then you can unmute yourself if you're able to, or we will unmute you, and we'll take questions and comments through audio as well as through the chat. So we've got a couple of spots built into the slides to stop and take comments, and if it seems appropriate, we may stop and do that a little bit more frequently. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Laura to pick up and begin our presentation. Laura?
Thanks, Alan. So we're going to have a tag team today. So in addition to Alan and me presenting, we have Arista Strunges and Chris Jeanette with Camiris, our consultant for this. So I just wanted to recognize that they're on the call, and we and they have been working very closely on this. So we're excited to be able to talk to you guys in a bit more detail on the neighborhood 1 districts. And before we jump into that, we want to remind you guys that comprehensive plan is, especially for zoning, one of the primary basis for the districts. So we've talked a lot about place types with you guys in the past, but now as the plan is out on the street, those of you guys that have looked at it will also find that there is a lot of additional policy. So place types is part of the policy, but then there are 10 sections of policy, much of which relates to the UDO. And so between the policy and place types, they lay the foundation for the regulations and the zoning districts that we'll be talking through with you guys today. So again, we're looking at the live place types. These are really our neighborhoods. There's the neighborhood 1, the lower intensity, and neighborhood 2 being the greater intensity. Today, we're going to focus on neighborhood 1. We will be back at a future meeting to go through the neighborhood 2 zoning districts. Again, for the neighborhood 1 place type, just as a quick reminder, these are neighborhoods with a variety of housing types, though single family being the predominant use and housing type in these areas, but also opportunities for duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes, civic uses, and so forth. Generally low rise in character, front lawns, landscaped yards, typically individual backyards, with limited impervious cover, particularly compared to the districts that we talked about earlier, the mixed use and non-residential. Typically, these neighborhoods have a lot of unifying characteristics such as setbacks and building heights that have been maintained as originally developed. From a transportation perspective, well-connected local street network, but also, especially over time, moving towards residents being able to bike and walk and or take transit to nearby destinations. So an evolution of the neighborhoods from being probably more vehicularly oriented in a lot of cases, but not all of them, to having a greater range of transportation opportunities. So we talked about this last time, but just to remind you, this is one of the big ideas in the Charlotte 20 comprehensive plan policy framework. Big concepts is to allow duplexes and triplexes on all lots where single family housing is allowed, but consistent with the lot size in those neighborhoods, the setback requirements, and other standards that will be in the UDO. So where you have neighborhoods that are zoned exclusively for single family housing now, in the future, per the comprehensive plan, we're developing zoning districts that will not be exclusively for single family housing, but will also allow duplexes and triplexes. In addition, on arterials, looking at allowing fourplexes or quadruplexes, as we call them in the UDO, when there's an affordable housing unit included. And also have worked on a zoning district that would allow single family attached, small scale single family attached, and multifamily housing, typically along all arterials, still in the neighborhood 1 areas that will be mapped as part of the place type map. So I think this is where we hand off. I'll just quickly say that we are looking at 9 districts, and some of those districts are translations, will be translations of our current district. So our current R3, R4, R5, R6, and R8 will translate to neighborhood 1A through D, and neighborhood 1E will come from our urban residential district. And then we have some additional districts that are new concepts for our community. And Arista and Chris are going to take us through some more of the details on these districts.
Yeah, actually, before that, I'm going to jump in because we're going to cover the definitions that for our residential building types, so that when we talk about them, you'll have an understanding of exactly what it is we mean. And most of them are fairly self-evident, but there are a couple of things that are a little tricky. So we'll just go through them. Beginning with a single family dwelling, which is a structure containing only one dwelling unit. That's fairly simple. I think most people are okay with that. A duplex is a structure containing 2 dwelling units, but a twin home is also a structure containing 2 dwelling units. The difference between the duplex and a twin home is that the twin home is actually configured such that each dwelling unit is on a separate sublot, whereas a duplex is a structure with 2 dwelling units on a single lot. So that is a bit of a distinction. So when we talk about those, just remember that a twin home, think of it as having an invisible line going down the middle of the building and extending out into the yard as well, and dividing that into 2 sublots. A triplex is simply a structure with 3 dwelling units, and a quadruplex is simply a structure containing 4 dwelling units. A townhouse, we all know townhouses, we're building them left and right in Charlotte, is a structure consisting of 3 or more dwelling units, such that the units are attached horizontally, separated by a party wall, and each unit is located on a separate sublot. And this differs. The townhouse may look like a multifamily attached, but the difference is the sublots. So this slide will get into a multifamily dwelling. And multifamily we define as structure containing 5 or more dwelling units, with each unit stacked either attached, either stacked or attached horizontally, excuse me. So the slide on the left kind of looks like a townhome, but it is considered to be a multifamily attached unit building. And the difference between the townhome and the multifamily attached is, as I said, the attached here each unit doesn't have its own separate sublot. So this would be, for example, several units in a building on one lot and not on individual sublots. And then the photo on the right is an example of a multifamily stacked unit, which are multiple units in a building. And they may or may not have individual entrances, but all on a single lot. Typically, our typical multifamily residential that we're all familiar with. And then the last 2 definitions are things that we may or may not have covered before. Multi-dwelling development, the photo on the left, is a development consisting of 2 or more single-family, twin home, duplex, triplex, quadruplex, townhouse, and or multifamily structures planned and developed under single ownership and constructed on the same lot or parcel of land. So that's a mouthful, but essentially what it means is that a planned multifamily development consisting of different dwelling types. And the aerial photo on the left happens to be of the blue development on North Tryon Street, which you might be able to see consists of some multifamily stacked multifamily buildings, garden apartment type of development, but also some carriage houses in the foreground and some townhomes in the background adjacent to the wooded area. So this is an example of what we would consider to be a multi-dwelling development. And then the ADU, the accessory dwelling unit, is an additional dwelling unit associated with and incidental to a principal single-family duplex or twin home structure on the same lot. Maybe within the principal building, or maybe in a detached accessory structure such as a garage. So if you've got questions or comments on that, we can stop and address those. I can see already that we've got some questions coming in via the chat window. So at some point we will stop and go back and address those.
And Alan, I think this might be a good point because we do have a number of questions to maybe quickly go through the questions.
Yep.
And some things we may say, hold on, we're going to answer those things in a minute. So if it's okay, I'll just kind of quickly read through questions. The first is an arterial, so different questions about some streets. We've had a number of questions about streets. The same as a collector, and actually a collector is its own street classification that is really kind of between a local and an arterial, but it's distinct from a local street and from an arterial, and it's probably characteristics a bit more like a local street. And I hope I haven't bungled that too much from the transportation perspective. Matt asked, also I guess Arista and Chris jump in on these too, as well as Alan. Will there be lot size minimums that are different from duplexes and triplexes in the regulations, and I believe Arista or Chris answered that they will be the same standards as single family. Rebecca said neighborhood 1 was described as primarily single family detached, but there's no control on percentage ratio to maintain single family, and the question is correct. And that's, you'll see in a minute the regulations, but no, there's not intended to be a control. They could, over time, establish neighborhoods. We'll see probably more duplexes and triplexes. And Arista and Chris, anything that you want to add to what I've said so far?
No, we're good. And I was responding to those as well. That was me that was typing those answers.
Okay, thank you. David talked about the 4-lane streets. I think you'll see that we actually went and for the small apartments and so forth, we actually made that just all arterials, because not all arterials are 4 lanes in the regulations, to make that work a little bit better. I think that will address your issue. You'll see that. So Arista, as you guys, if you scroll down, Arista has answered some of the questions, so I'm probably repeating her answers. And so I'm going to ask Arista and Chris for to help with this question from Thomas, that I think dwelling single family detached should be clarified to be a unit under a single ownership.
I would guess I'm not clear what that would mean. I mean, we don't really refer to dwelling types in the type in general, refer to the types of ownership. So really what we're looking at is its development. So it would be one dwelling unit on one lot. And I think that gets at that. I mean, honestly, it would, most times I'm trying to think of an exception to that it wouldn't be under single ownership. So maybe just a little more clarity on what is meant by that. I don't know, Chris, do you have any insight into that?
I'd echo you, I guess. I mean, if we could maybe hear from Thomas in terms of what his thoughts are with that comment, it might be helpful.
Yeah. Okay. So that was quick, and I need to kind of spend a little bit more time on that one. I've wrestled with the whole single family detached definition a little bit. So I guess I'm more of a placeholder to kind of step back and take a look at what it really means, because, you know, what happens if you have several single family detached homes that aren't under a single ownership? Are they still technically single family if you know 3 or 4 houses are all owned by one person on a larger lot? That kind of an aspect of it. So that definition seems a little ambiguous on what it, or restrictive either way. So I think we just kind of need to think a little bit more about what we're trying to establish with that definition.
Yeah, this is Nate. There's a lot of single family detached communities now that are all rental on one lot, 200 or 300 homes on one piece of property.
Okay, so we are attempting to address that. Even the slide that's up here now that you can see multi-dwelling development, where we do want to accommodate that whole kind of development where single family homes are constructed and they're all rental. So maybe there is some caveat we need to add to how we defined a single family dwelling. Our intent is not to disallow that. We are working to make sure that the ordinance is clear that that's allowed. But that's a good observation in saying that if it's on a lot, but it may not be on a lot, it may be one giant parcel filled with single family homes, say for rent. So we'll take another look at that, because we do have that in our minds, that's something that we need to accommodate.
And thank you, Nate, for not dancing around that as I was. That was exactly kind of what I was getting at. So.
And Arista, would that also not be the multi-dwelling development if you had, say, 4 single family homes on a single lot under common ownership? Yeah, it would be. What we're missing is one linkage piece. So
We've defined single family as being on one lot because that's how that's typically how it's defined. But as you correctly pointed out, this multi-dwelling development says consists of 2 or more single family. So it could be multiple single family, kind of this horizontal property regime type of configuration. So we just need to make sure that the definition for multi-dwelling development doesn't contradict that of single family dwelling, and find that linkage that's in there.
Thank you. That clarified it for me. So Eric said he'd love to see the street types and map to be updated at some point in the future. CDOT is working on the streets map. They do have classifications that are from, I believe, urban street design guidelines, but different classifications of arterials. And then are developing the streets map like they did for the TOD areas, developing that for the entire community, for all of the arterials in the community, talking about what the needs are of each individual arterial. I think the next comment, I see more comments keep coming in, try to catch up, is quads should be allowed everywhere, a duplex or triplex is allowed. So hearing that, I think we're kind of taking the lead, or comp plan setting the lead for this. So we're basing the districts on that. Certainly, as you know, the comp plan process is open for comments, and I think that'd be a great comment. We got some folks from the comp plan team also on here, able to hear the comments as well. From Clayton, does that mean rental townhouses are not townhouses? Actually, it does. And that means that they are multifamily and they're attached form of multifamily. Did I get that right, Arista and Chris?
Yes, I think so.
Thank you.
Laura, let me jump in because maybe this needs to be clarified, but I think that rental townhouses, I mean, townhouse could still be rental. It could be, individual sublots and still be rented. So the distinction is not necessarily ownership, owner occupied versus rental,
Right.
but whether or not each unit comes with its own sublot.
Thank you.
Yeah, but in the case of townhomes with no sublots, that's essentially the definition of multifamily attached.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's important to note that really whether it's owned or rented, that's not zoning's purview. We're just looking at how it's developed.
Question about arterials. Those are really our minor and major thoroughfares, if you're used to that terminology. But that is what you can go on to Charlotte Explorer and find those types of streets. Keith asked, and we'll get into a little bit of technicality. Why does a townhome have to be 3 units? Why not 2? And not to belabor this, but there is some state law that tells what we can regulate, where we can regulate things that, well, good question as you're thinking about this. Sorry, that doesn't apply. Rist and Chris, can you guys remember why? And if
Yeah, well, twin home would basically address kind of the townhouse configuration. So it'd be 2 dwelling units on 2 sublots, which is townhouses then go to 3. Building code also starts looking at townhouses as 3 units. So we've made that distinction because there are certain restrictions on townhouses that we can't control in terms of the aesthetics. So it comes out of those 2 things. So it's really looking at basically your 2-unit townhouse would be your twin home. And if they're both on 1 lot, it would be a duplex.
Duplex. David said there's a beautiful small townhome development on East Kingston. it seems that would be illegal under these new provisions. Not necessarily, but you would have to zone for it. So in your base zoning districts would not allow that, but you could pursue zoning to allow that townhome development, as opposed to, and I think the comprehensive plan anticipates that as well. Let's see. Okay, Nate, do you want to talk a little bit about your platting issues with townhome versus single ownership? I know we're kind of getting into the weeds for.
Oh, I think it's what Thomas was talking about. I don't have anything further. I guess on the platting side, I think we're taking all that into account as we're starting to talk about cluster developments and all these things that don't currently work with our current zoning ordinance.
Well, and that's what I think we think we're aware of some of these issues. So we'll see as we go through this and as you guys have the draft to review if we're capturing it and dealing with those issues. David has a situation of one lot subdivided into two separate ownerships with common forecourt, but with, okay, so David, we may need to talk to you offline on this one. It seemed fairly detailed, unless Arista and Chris, do you guys have anything to say really quickly on that one?
No, I think we would need a little bit more detail on that one. You know, because it can kind of fit into a couple of different ones. You know, we need to just actually see it and look at it before we would want to comment on anything.
Right.
I'm glad to see how you all acknowledge that this can get pretty confusing pretty quickly.
Yes. Are twin homes allowed as part of a townhome community? I think, Keith, that's a good point. We need to go back and make sure that we're accomplishing that. Walter said,
and I think all that would be addressed within the multi-dwelling development, as that allows all the different types of developments.
Yeah,
you could have townhouse and twin home and duplex and single family. You could have kind of everything in there.
Walter said zoning doesn't regulate ownership, and I think someone's pointed that up. Clayton has sent out something to share with everyone. So I know we're kind of short on time and a lot of messages. So I'm going to suggest, unless there's anything really compelling, that we move on. If anything else, someone wants to raise their hand now and ask questions. Otherwise, maybe we can move on and see if some of the rest of the presentation doesn't capture the questions. Folks good with that?
Okay. So I'm going to take over here for a little while and just kind of walk us through the zoning districts that have been established to implement the guidance that we've got coming out of the place types policy. So some of this is going to be familiar from our previous presentation, but we're going to be adding sort of additional levels of detail to flesh these out and elucidate some of the concepts. Excuse me. So we have some pretty good guidance in terms of land use coming out of the place types for the neighborhood 1 districts. You know, I think Laura covered some of this, but just to kind of reiterate, they're designed to be primarily single family detached homes as the primary use. ADUs are anticipated to be found within the place type. Duplexes, tris, quads, and civic uses may also be found within the place type. And then in some cases, small commercial buildings are also anticipated to be found in older neighborhoods. So how do we translate these sort of land use concepts into a series of zoning districts that work for neighborhood 1? We've come up with this initial series of 5 here, the N1A through the N1E. And as Laura mentioned, those are replacing a whole slat of current zoning districts within the city's ordinance. So each one of these first 5 N1 districts would allow for single family, duplex, twin homes, and triplex dwellings on any lot in any district. Quads under the current draft would be allowed on arterial streets and in exchange for an affordable unit being provided within the quadruplex itself. ADUs are going to be allowed within all of these districts. Civic and institutional uses, things like parks, churches, schools would be allowed within the districts. And then there's this concept of the neighborhood commercial establishment that we've brought in to respond to that guidance about small commercial buildings. So what the neighborhood commercial establishment is it's essentially an existing commercial structure in the N1. So if I've got an N1 parcel and there is an existing established commercial building on it, I can put a commercial use back into that building. I couldn't, for instance, come into the neighborhood 1 districts, build a brand new commercial building and put a commercial use in. It's really designed to sort of accommodate reuse of buildings. And the neighborhood commercial establishment itself as a use is kind of a basket that holds a series of small, sort of less intense commercial uses, things like art galleries, yoga studios, things that are really designed to sort of fit into the neighborhood fabric. Corner stores, in some cases as well, could work. In addition to those first 5, we also have the N1F, which is the district that's designed to really respond to the place types guidance related to smaller lot single family, as well as small scale townhome and multifamily development within the neighborhood 1 place type. So what this one does is it allows for the development of dwellings on lots that are at least 3,500 square feet in area. And as we go through this process and the place types are mapped and eventually translated into zoning districts, it's anticipated that this N1F district would be primarily applied along arterial streets to allow for sort of the multitude of development forms that this district permits. Those being small scale townhomes, multifamily, and smaller residential development. So specific to townhome and multifamily attached, what we've done to ensure that these sort of stay smaller in scale and fit better into the neighborhood fabric is put in a limitation that if you want to do either one of those development types, you're limited to 2 principal structures on the lot. If you wanted to do a multifamily stacked development, you're only limited to 1 building. The idea, again, being we're trying to keep these at a smaller scale and not really accommodate sort of larger townhouse or multifamily development within the N1 districts. These would also include requirements for on-site open space in relation to these district standards for specific dwelling types. And important to note also that the dimensional standards that are included in the N1F are really designed to accommodate that interface between the development and sort of the arterial frontage condition that's anticipated here. Okay, in terms of dimensional standards, we also have a series of guidance that we're trying to implement coming out of the comprehensive plan and the place types. And for neighborhood 1, that includes things like buildings being typically located away from the street with the front yard, rear yards that are primarily used as private open space, as well as buffer from things to the rear, and then front, side, and rear setbacks that might vary in size from neighborhood to neighborhood, but generally across a block and across a neighborhood overall are fairly consistent, or anticipated to be fairly consistent. So in the table here to the right, you can see there are a series of columns. As Laura explained, each one of our proposed districts relates to one of the current districts within the city, with the exception of the N1F, which is a new district. You can see we've got minimum lot areas established for each of these, as well broken down for residential and non-residential uses. Minimum lot width is broken down the same way. We've got required minimum front setbacks, which are going to be measured differently depending upon if I'm on a local or collector or if I'm on an arterial street. And then side and rear setbacks that, primarily, and I will say, significantly align with the city's current development standards for each one of the districts that are sort of referenced across that table. So additional dimensional standards that we've developed as part of these districts, again, responding to some of the place types guidance that says the typical building in an N1 is no more than 3 to 4 stories. So we've come up with maximum building heights for both residential and non-residential. You can kind of see what those are if you read across the table. For non-residential buildings, similar to what's allowed currently, we're allowing a little bit of additional height if you increase your setback from the minimum required setback up to a height of 60 feet maximum in each one of these districts. We've got some maximum building length standards that we've built in. Again, that's based on guidance that's coming out of the comprehensive plan and the place types. We've put in standards for ground floor transparency, which would be applicable to non-residential uses, as well as multifamily once we move up into the N1F. Same thing for upper floor transparency requirements and maximum blank wall area that we've included as well. Additionally, there are a series of standards designed to kind of get at some of the site design elements that we've identified for these districts. The first one of those is that for all dwelling types within the N1 districts, except for single family, all driveways, maneuvering areas, and all parking is going to be required to be to the side or to the rear of your structure. So it's prohibited between the front facade and the street. Surface parking spaces shall be located to the rear of principal structures, and that applies to tris, quads, townhomes, and multifamily development. And then further, all triplex, quadruplex, and multifamily principal structures are going to be required to orient toward a street and to provide a primary pedestrian entry facing the street. Alternatively, certain building types may be able to orient to a common open space. And there are some standards in there addressing that condition as well. So for the N1F only, and again, this comes directly out of the place types, there's a restriction that no more than 5 attached dwelling units are permitted, whether those are townhomes or multifamily attached. You can't have any more than 5 in one structure. And there are also in the draft, and as you guys get your hands on it, you'll see there are a series of additional standards that address site layout and building design. We've included a series of alternative development options. The first of those being cluster development. This is kind of a riff on what's in the city's current cluster development provisions. It's designed to provide additional open space and tree save in exchange for a little bit of flexibility in terms of how my lots are oriented and the size of those lots. So it's permitted as a development form within the N1A, B, and C. It would require a minimum of 10 acres for a cluster residential development. And how this was anticipated to work is that you'd be allowed to develop the same number of lots as you would under the straight zoning, but you wouldn't be required to meet things like the minimum lot area, the minimum lot width, or minimum setbacks. And again, that's in exchange for this provision of additional open space. So as we've said before, we're anticipating that moving forward, the subdivision regulations are going to require a base amount of open space and tree save. And that if you wanted to do cluster development, you'd be required to provide an additional 10% on top of that, at least half of which would be required to be provided as tree save. Additionally, we have this idea of a mixed income residential development and a mixed income bonus. This is, again, another new concept. It would apply once more to the N1A, B, and C districts. So for this one, you'd be required to have a minimum development site of at least 1 acre. And the way that it would work is essentially it would bonus you up to the next intense district. So if I were in the N1A and I wanted to use this, I'd be allowed to develop under the standards of the N1B and so forth, sort of up the line there. The way that it's intended to be applied is that 50% of the additional units that I'm allowed through this bonus would be required to be set aside for households earning 70% of the AMI or the area median income. It's structured to allow for AMI averaging, so I can average down to that 70%, but nothing that's included within the average or considered as affordable can be more than 100% of the AMI for the area. So you're required to do at least 2 affordable units as part of a mixed income development. And there are also standards we're working with the Department of Housing and Neighborhood Services to really flesh these out in terms of the distribution of these affordable units throughout the development, as well as sort of their character and ratios of things like unit counts and dwelling types to really ensure that these units are spread throughout the development. All right. That was a lot, and it was really fast. I saw the questions filling up in the chat box as I was talking.
Yeah, we want to go, the questions I think are kind of about where we left off, or new questions that have come in about what do we do in terms of frontage conditions for buildings. These are the most crucial elements in making public space. That's from David Walters. When you get the draft, which we anticipate sending out to you at the beginning of next week, we're hoping that you will see that we have addressed what we think are reasonable ways to address frontage conditions, and we'll say that we have done that within the context of the limitations of North Carolina state law, which does have some limitations for what we can do with single family homes, duplexes, twin homes, and townhomes. So we'd be glad to, we don't want to take everyone down that legal rabbit hole, but if anyone wants to discuss that with us offline, we'd be glad to go through that design aesthetics law and what we believe that it does and doesn't allow. Thomas has said we appreciate that we're trying to align with what we currently have. We should be encouraging, allowing for development to get tighter. Lot size, setbacks, et cetera, are very spacious and don't help us get more housing in the city than current code allows. So certainly hear that perspective. We do think that with allowing additional housing types, that is probably one way we can get more housing. And we're trying to balance all of this with maintaining to a certain extent the current neighborhood character, because we do have so many neighborhoods in our community. So it's a challenging balancing act. So we'll really look forward to comments from all of you guys to see if you think we have we're not going far enough or if we've gone too far.
Laura, can I interrupt and just suggest, since we have so many comments.
Alan, you're not coming through.
Okay. Is this any better? No.
We can't hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I can hear you, Alan.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, if Laura, if you can hear me, since there are so many comments.
Alan, you're breaking up. I'm going to go on to the next comment from Matt about R3 lots been designed to a denser standard due to tree save incentives. So what we're moving forward with so evidently I'm the only person who can't hear. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So it's probably my sound again on my computer. Maybe let me have Arista and Chris, if you guys could go through and do the answers to these questions.
Okay, where did we leave off?
This is Matt. So right now in R3, you've got a standard lot size, but then we've got tree save incentives that we use where you can get to a smaller lot size without having to rezone. And so, you know, you might have 12,000 square foot lots in R3 and you might have 8,000 square foot lots in R3 based on how much tree save you've set aside. When you do the alignment rezoning, how do you foresee the zoning happening? Will, you know, those lots that are R3 cluster now, if they're not big enough to be N1A, will they still be rezoned N1A but be non-conforming? Just so that you've got kind of a broader brush of zoning categories, or are they going to be sliced up more based on their actual lot size?
I was going to throw this to Alan if we can hear it, because I know Alan is speaking about the rezoning, the equivalency zoning, and then the zoning realignment and kind of how that's handled.
Yes, and I hope you can hear me. We've got a couple of slides at the end of this presentation that talks about how the existing zoning districts will translate to the new UDO zoning districts. This will be similar to how we handled the TOD alignment rezoning. However, I'm not as familiar with our current residential zoning regulations as others are, my colleagues are. I would say that there will be a direct translation between current conventional residential districts like R3 and R4 to one of the new UDO neighborhood districts. If there's a cluster development, we won't be translating optional or conditionally zoned parcels at first. And so I'm not clear whether a cluster subdivision is a conditional zoning. If so, it won't be translated to one of the new UDO districts, at least initially. So I'm going to need some clarification on that. But if it is a conventionally zoned R3, R4, R5, R6, as when the UDO districts are, new zoning districts are adopted at some point, those will all automatically translate to one of the new N1 districts, N1A, N1B, so forth. Matt, does that get at your question?
I think so. I mean, it sounds like where we will end up is with R3 lots that are by right that don't meet the N1A categories will still be zoned N1A. They'll just be smaller than normal, but moving forward, there won't be any new lots created that are too small. So,
right.
Okay.
Okay. And I was just handed a note. This is really dramatic, right? That Laura's having laptop issues, and so she's trying to disconnect and reconnect. She's due to get a new laptop here. The one she's got, she's been having problems with. So in her absence, I'm going to rely on Chris and Arista to help walk through some of these questions. And what I was going to suggest to Laura, and she couldn't hear me, was since we have so many, there's a timestamp, at least on my window, comment window to the right. And it might be helpful if we can kind of periodically tell where we are on that timestamp so that we don't always have to go searching for David's or Brent's last comment. So where did we leave off? Can anybody tell me where we left off on these questions?
So we're on Thomas's question at 11:15 a.m. Regarding, sorry.
You're on Central Time.
We're on Eastern Time, Arista.
Oh, okay. I'm the only Chicago person. So here in Chicago at 11:15 a.m. So 12:15.
12:14, Alan.
Okay.
Okay. So there's a comment about that it's coming from the comp plan that townhomes in that N1F district are limited to 5. Maybe it should be expanded to 6. As Laura said, the comp plan team is here, and those are, policy items that, we will put up for consideration because we take our guidance for these districts from the comp plan. Then there is at 12:15 a.m. The issues of, and I think this, Matt, if I'm correct, this relates to kind of the previous thing that comes in also with tree save or stormwater about lot coverage standards, and have a conversation with stormwater about applicability.
It's semi-related. We're doing a lot of infill projects, and we'll have people approach us, with 1 or 2 single family lots saying, hey, we'd like to redo this within the zoning. I mean, I feel like the direction this is all heading is adding density, and adding density adds built upon area. And the onesie twosie solutions for stormwater that we're dealing with right now are very complex. It's one of those things that it's almost like the smaller the project gets, the more complicated sometimes the stormwater solution becomes. We've got like a large lot that you divide into 2, and now you're doing pervious pavers for one driveway but not another. And I think it's worth having a conversation with stormwater, because their job is to make sure that the city's in alignment with their stormwater permit from the feds. And if, we're envisioning density and built upon area that's moving into existing R3 neighborhoods that's considerably higher than what they're anticipating, the solution, it's a second conversation that needs to happen. Like, will the city work on regional stormwater detention or water quality solutions, or is it just going to continue to muddle along lot by lot by lot? Because I think everybody's goal is to have Charlotte accommodate its growth well. And if everything's sort of chopped up with, you know, rigged stormwater solutions because that's the way these two policy documents talk to one another, it's going to be complicated.
Okay. Yeah, no, we understand it's kind of an additional layer of regulation that falls upon us and doesn't make it as straightforward as it seems. So I do believe, you know, as we're working on this UDO stormwater is an important part of this, and that we'll continue to explore this further.
And I'm gonna suggest that maybe in the near term, and Andrew also is the person who is working with the stormwater group, that maybe we have an offline discussion with some of the folks on the call and talk about that, so that we don't continue to draft something all the way through the end without having that discussion.
That's a great idea.
Certainly. I made note of that and we'll follow up.
Thanks, Andrew.
And Clayton asked to see the minimum lot size slide again, so I put that on screen. Clayton, did you have any comments about the minimum lot sizes?
Yeah, I was actually kind of curious because there's a project in NODA called Atlas Urban Homes. And I was looking at Polaris right now, and it has 2,300 square foot lot sizes. And it's kind of like a townhouse style development, but everything's detached, you know, kind of have maximum amounts of natural light throughout the buildings. Is something like that going to no longer be allowed?
I would say and that yes, if new development, if there are individual lots, that if they were less than, well, you know, our smallest allowable lot size currently in our draft standards is the 3,000 square foot lots in the N1E district. That's a fairly small building lot. I know you can build a house on 2,300 square feet, but
yeah, I would take a look at those because they're really interesting in how they function kind of in the NODA neighborhood. And I think something like that should be allowed in the future. And I just think it's probably a good idea to look at them.
Eric, that's your area, right? You've got your hand up.
Right. Yep, I did. I wanted to make sure that I expressed this point because it was actually the neighborhood association and the neighbors that pushed for that particular layout. They were more comfortable with that, lesser units, single family style detached, not townhomes. So that was one of the main reasons why that exists, because of that cooperation between both groups. So just wanted to put that out there, that's I think is a good point to look back and get and providing that flexibility.
Thank you.
And Eric, what was the name of the project again?
It's called Atlas Urban Homes.
I think Revolve.
Yeah, Revolve Residential did it.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
And I think we still have a few slides to go through that may even address that. But yes, if it's the project I'm thinking of, very familiar with it. And by the time we get to the end of all of our districts, including the neighborhood 2 districts, don't think there's anything that has been built under our current standard. I won't say anything. We're not trying to, by and large, eliminate things that have been built under current standards and not allow them in the future. So I think that those projects that people like will be a good test. So if you want to shoot them to us, that would be helpful.
We're getting to the bottom of the list of comments that need a response before we move on. I think maybe just David Walter's comment at 12:25, and then we can move on to the next slide if that's okay. David, can you elaborate on the comment that you made at 12:25?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me all?
Yes.
Okay, good. It's simply that, as I said in my little note, I totally get this isn't a form-based code per se, but when we do form-based coding, we don't look for as many differences as we seem to be looking for here. We seem, at least my reading, and it may not be accurate, but my reading is that we've got so many little differences between this and that and the other, that issues that have been brought up of conflict with other ordinances, or the fact that when you get down to detailed design, like the Atlas homes, we're running foul of the very good ideas that are in the comp plan, because place types, as we know, are all about including a variety of compatible stuff together. And the UDO seems to be taking a scalpel to that nice communal lump and just slicing off bits, which then don't fit back together very well. I'm sort of worried about the conceptual mismatch here, to be blunt. So there. Bye.
So, we've seen some additional comments on this. Really, if you look at the way our community is developed and what we're doing here, as far as our current single family neighborhoods, the big difference is the difference in the lot sizes. And that's, okay, I don't know where to slide. That's really in A through D, to really try to maintain that lotting pattern. And I think Arista said that in a response to the chat, is to recognize and acknowledge that character that's been set by that lotting pattern. So that is the foundation for the way we've done this. Otherwise, there are some minor differences, but these dimensional standards are consistent with what we have out there now. So if you have a neighborhood that right now has slightly bigger lots so that you maintain that neighborhood character, again, you have different housing types accommodated in there, but you don't all of a sudden start to introduce something that is totally different from that character. Whether that's the right thing to do or not, I think it is a discussion, but that is the premise of this approach.
Okay.
And I don't know, I see what Thomas has just said, but again, the intent is to allow that the increase in density through building different housing types, not through starting to split up lots and create something that looks like it has landed from out of space in the middle of a neighborhood. So if you look at, and I'll use David's neighborhood, your probably typical lot is 50 by 150. You would maintain that characteristic, but allow a lot more homes that are duplexes and triplexes. I don't know, that I'm still seeing pain on David's face, so maybe we'll need more discussion on this.
I'm going to suggest that we move on in the interest of time. We've got some additional material to cover, and then we can circle back for remaining questions and comments at the end. Laura, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
All right, let me go through these, and then we'll pick up with our N1 Cottage Court overlay, and I think I'm going to throw it back to Chris.
Sure. Okay, so in addition to the base districts that we've talked about so far, we've got a couple or several overlay districts that have also been developed, designed to be applicable to the neighborhood 1 place type. So the first one of those is the N1 CCO. It's the Cottage Court Overlay District. And this one is designed to be really applied to any of the N1 districts except for the N1F. So you could have this in the N1A through the N1E. It allows for single-family duplex and twin home dwellings, as well as additional uses such as common facilities, if it's a common kitchen or recreation or event space. It would require a minimum of 4 or more dwelling units in at least 4 detached residential buildings. Site standards are included within the specifications for this overlay. So the total lot area required would be calculated as 50% of the total lot area per the underlying district. Individual lots or building sites don't have to meet the standards of the underlying district for things like lot size, lot widths, building setbacks, or building coverage. But dwellings would be required to either front on a public street or around a common open space as sort of a logical site design. We've also included within here what we're calling the small unit bonus, and this would allow for a 25% increase in the amount of residential buildings that you could put on a site, up to 5 maximum. And the way that you would earn this bonus is by providing small, likely more affordable units. It's designed to really encourage the use of the cottage court form to actually build smaller, more affordable units. So if I'm building units that are all 800 square feet or less, and I'm not exceeding 24 feet in height, I can get this bonus and build 25% more residential buildings on my site. And the CCO, as it's currently drafted, would require approval of conditional site plan and a rezoning process. The second overlay district is what we've called the N1 RIO, or the RIO, which is the Residential Infill Overlay District. And this has been created sort of in response to some feedback that we've heard about potentially, developing a tool to help preserve the existing supply of housing and maintain an existing sort of pattern across a neighborhood specific to things related like height and building footprint. So this one, as it's drafted, is designed to facilitate infill development in the N1 districts that maintains the scale of the existing neighborhood through specific controls that address height and the actual size of dwellings within the district. We have specified at this time that it must be mapped within Route 4, that there must be at least 50 contiguous lots in order for this overlay to be established, and that it can be initiated by either a majority vote of city council or 60% of property owners petitioning within the designated geographic area. And it would be able to be used in any N1A through N1E zoning district. So some of the specifics of this, exactly how it would sort of limit things like height and square footage, we've developed a couple different mechanisms for that. So the first of them is what's called the building height setback plane. This idea that your sidewall height at your required interior side setback would be limited to either 24 feet or the average sidewall height of adjacent buildings. And that from that point, you would be allowed essentially a 45-degree building height plane. So 1 foot of additional height for 1 foot of additional setback up to the maximum height of the district. So either 48 or 40 feet, depending upon what district you're in. The setback plane would include permission for dormers and gable ends to sort of penetrate through that setback up to a certain percentage of the square footage of the area of the setback. And then in terms of maximum building size, so there are controls in here limiting your maximum building size based upon total heated square footage. So you would be allowed to be either the average square footage measured based upon single family structures within one block face and the block face across the street, so sort of the predominant pattern along a street corridor, or 800 square feet per unit, whichever one of those is greater. And so single family dwellings, if I'm developing an infill single family dwelling within the RIO, I can actually exceed that maximum by no more than 25%. So it's really designed to sort of allow for a little bit of incremental change, but to really sort of reinforce the pattern of height and square footage of structures in a neighborhood where this would be mapped. Additionally, we have the neighborhood character overlay. which we're still working on developing some of the specifics of. But this one is essentially a tool that would allow a neighborhood to create or modify a set of district standards to really reinforce, maintain, preserve existing patterns. And so what it would allow you to do is essentially say, within this one particular neighborhood as defined, our predominant setback isn't 27 feet, it's 12 feet. So we're gonna create our own little zoning district that says it's 12 feet, and we're gonna also change the maximum building height within this district. So really allowing for a tailored set of standards to conserve or preserve the character within a specific area. Again, we're still working out some of the details in terms of the applicability of this, the exact development standards that would be able to be modified or created as part of it, as well as an overall approval process. We're still working through some of those details with staff, and we anticipate that we'll be able to share those within a future draft.
Okay, Laura, the next couple of slides are on implementation. Do you want me to get through those before we stop for questions, or do you think this is a good stopping point?
I'll admit I've been looking at the questions and have not been paying attention. Whatever you think is appropriate at this point, Alan.
All right, let's go through and do the last couple of content slides, and then we will stop for questions. So I touched on this a little bit earlier in the presentation, but I just wanted to go over with you how we envision the actual implementation of these zoning districts to occur once we have the place types map. So the order of the sequence of things that need to happen is that our comprehensive plan needs to be adopted, which is scheduled for spring of 2021. And then once that's done, we've got to map the entire city with our new place types. So those have got to be mapped on the ground. And then at some point also in 2021, the UDO and the new UDO zoning districts will be adopted. So as of a chosen date, and I'm just saying January 1st of 2022, but that date would be an agreed upon date. It doesn't necessarily have to be that date. Or rather I should say, all of the current conventional zoning districts in the city will no longer exist because we will have adopted new UDO zoning districts. So they have to become something new. So they will be translated to one of our new UDO zoning districts. And I know it's a little hard to see on these slides because the maps are so small. And the maps, I just chose an area that had a lot of different land uses and zoning categories just purely for illustrative purposes. So they don't read anything into any of these maps other than I'm just trying to illustrate the concept of what we're doing. So say on January 1st of 2022, the R5 district doesn't exist anymore because the new UDO districts will have been adopted. So it needs to translate. So if you're zoned R5, you will automatically translate to, let's say, N1C, I think is the corresponding district as of now. But that may not be the final destination for those parcels because they may not, even though they may have translated to N1C, the place type mapping may have something different envisioned for that neighborhood. And so they may need to be rezoned again and aligned with the place type mapping. And this is exactly what we did when we adopted our new TOD zoning districts last year. When the new TOD zoning districts were adopted, all of the existing conventional TOD zoning translated to TOD-CC, but then we did that giant rezoning, we called it the TOD alignment rezoning, where we rezoned a lot of those again from TOD-CC to their final destination. And we also pulled in industrial parcels and commercial parcels and everything else. And we aligned the zoning with our land use recommendation. So we're going to go through a similar process when the UDO is adopted and the place types are mapped, only instead of rezoning 1,555 parcels, as we did with TOD, we'll be rezoning tens of thousands of parcels on a citywide basis. So here's another slide that kind of illustrates the point. The O2 district, for example, won't exist anymore. So that area has got to be translated to something different. Possibly it's a neighborhood center district if this area becomes a neighborhood center. Our R17 district, for example, which is a multifamily district today, that R17 multifamily district won't exist anymore. It will need to translate maybe to something like an N2B. These are, again, only examples just to illustrate the concept that some of these districts won't be there anymore and they have to be something else. Now, on this particular map, we've got some conditional districts and some optional districts like a MUD CD district or MUD-O, and there's even an R43 multifamily conditional district. They'll stay the same for now because they're conditional districts. They're tied to a specific site plan or plan. They've been approved by City Council with certain conditions or standards. So initially, they won't change. At some point, we may go back and take another look at all of those conditional districts to see what, if anything, should change with those. But for the time being, at least initially, we're going to leave those as is. So I think that is a good stopping point now to go back and collect all of our questions up until this point. And can someone tell me where we left off with questions? I think Laura and Arista are busy typing.
Scrolling to try to find Alan.
Yeah. We did have around the 12:30 or so mark, 12:33, some conversation about your setbacks.
I think it's around 12:14. There was a comment about townhouse orientation. I think that was kind of where we stopped.
Oh boy, we'll go that far back.
And I did write a response to that one regarding the not permitting front access townhomes. We are continuing to explore that. I did type a comment on that because we are hampered by the North Carolina aesthetics law regarding how we can do that, in particular requiring front entry placement. We can't do that for townhomes, but we're continuing to look at options for that, how we can orient them, how we can deal with things like, you know, parking that isn't necessarily in the garage. We can control where that is placed. So we understand the concern. We have the same concern, and we're still working on it. The best way that we can put that forward. I'll just kind of keep going if that's okay with everyone. Yeah. Around 12:17 a.m., David Walters, cluster development has a bad vibe with most folks in suburbia. We know based on a misunderstanding of what it means and has negative connotations. You know, we've seen it called other things, we being Chris and myself, things like conservation design is another term that's often used with that, which really tends to work a little bit better because it implies that that area of open space, the area of tree save, kind of would need to work with the city to see how they would want to handle it if there is a name change that is desired. So I don't know if anybody has anything to add.
Honestly, that's a good idea. I saw that.
I think we did talk to Matt's comment. We talked about the stormwater issues that kind of arise from that. how can we, from Eric, how can we get less driveways and more alleys in certain types of districts and place types? I don't know if the city wants to, anybody from the city wants to talk to that, but I know we're trying to encourage more alleys. Alleys are great. And kind of working on that kind of street network that does involve alleys. I don't know if Laura or Alan want to chime in here.
Well, we encourage alleys, but if it is a single family subdivision, I don't know what our new subdivision regulations can and will require in terms of alleys. But certainly we agree that alleys should be employed wherever possible so that we can get parking and garage access from alleys and fewer driveways with street connections. But we are, I don't know if anyone on my team can add anything to that conversation about alleys.
Hey, Alan, this is Kevin. I will say that it's a topic of discussion with SSI, and I'm not quite sure yet. I've got the information to be able to pass on one way or the other right now, but I know it is being discussed.
Okay.
Yes.
So stay tuned for more information about that. Okay.
I guess I'm driving. So
okay. Yep.
Sure. 12:21 p.m. I almost said a.m. I believe this is Nate. How do we incentivize things we want? Affordable housing, additional tree save, public open space. I think you can see a couple things within the N1 districts. In particular, there will be requirements for open space for larger developments, such as the multifamily. You saw within the cluster development, the additional requirements for tree save. And I think within the affordable housing component of this, there is the incentive for quads that one of the units should be affordable. There is the mixed income development with affordable housing. Cottage Court does kind of in a roundabout way by encouraging smaller developments or smaller dwellings. The hope is that would help to increase affordable housing as well as kind of the mix of housing types within the district. So we're trying to incorporate that in different ways throughout these N1 districts, really looking at it again, kind of looking at them as your primarily single family, but, how can we get some of that in place? And I think those are some of the areas that you're seeing that happen.
Yeah, and to dovetail off that too, it's a little bit different than TOD just because we're doing more of a balancing act in terms of trying to, bring in these ideas of density and affordability and more open space, but also still balancing concerns about maintaining neighborhood character and sort of the identity of a lot of these neighborhoods that's already in place. So in terms of developing things to incentivize these, we have it's a small bag of carrots. In the TOD districts, we had many more sort of things that we could think about to potentially offer up. It's a little trickier here with the neighborhood one in particular. If you have any specific suggestions, obviously we're always open to hearing if there's anything we might have missed.
Okay, so moving down, we did actually, David did speak to his comment at 12:25 a.m.
Let's go to, Arista, let's go to 12.
You can drive, I'm fine.
Okay, let's go to 12:32 with Nate's comment, who agrees with Clayton that on our minimum lot sizes, and Clayton was talking about the Atlas development in NODA, suggesting that our 3,000 square foot may be still too large. I don't know whether after you saw some information about the Cottage Court Overlay, if that's something that can get you those small lots, but get something in exchange for it, like a some common open space or a planned development, in which case in the Cottage Court Overlay, you don't necessarily need to adhere to those minimum lot size, lot width, setback standards if you do a cohesive cottage court development.
So with the cottage court development, it would have to be developed around a central green space, or would the
Not
green
necessarily.
space, it could be on the perimeter.
Yes.
So
not
I know with like
necessarily.
Atlas Home does have a green space along the perimeter.
I don't know that the green space is required. Arista, Chris?
I was reading. I'm sorry, I missed that.
It does.
It is.
It says dwellings front the public street and around a common open space is how it's worded.
Interesting.
Right. It could be, and it could be multiple common open spaces as long as they meet the minimum dimensions. So it can be kind of, so you can be on a street or you can be on these common open spaces that are throughout the development.
Now, question, I noticed in the one right after Cottage Court, I can't remember what it was called exactly. It mentioned a minimum amount of lots. Would there be a minimum amount of lots for Cottage Court as well?
Cottage Court has a minimum amount of, I think it's 4 dwelling units and 4 principal residential buildings.
Yep.
The one that you're referencing is what we've nicknamed the Rio, the residential
Rio.
infill overlay, and that's the one that has the 50 contiguous lots. But Cottage Court has a lesser standard, understanding that those, while they can be big, they can also be very small and slotted into a neighborhood.
Thank you.
Okay. My screen just went a little crazy, but if you can all still hear me, we had some conversations around 1233 about setbacks. Some of the setbacks that we're suggesting in the N1A and N1B, C, D are huge.
Yeah, and so I'd be open to hearing what a better suggestion would be. Those are based on the base setbacks from those current existing districts, and understand too that we're planning on pulling in things like the alternative setback, where if you're on a block that's 25% developed, that you can adjust your setback depending on sort of the established setback line. So there's going to be some flexibility in there that you're not really seeing in the tables. That's going to bring things kind of more in line to the options that are within the current ordinance.
This is Matt. I'd recommend you look at the residential tree ordinance, because there are, like I mentioned before, lot size incentives that exist today by right that reduce setbacks. And I mean, it's like if this is your starting point, you've written out everything that has incentivized tree protection in lieu of, by replacing it, with density incentives elsewhere. I think you need to look at some of these other pieces of the ordinance and other chapters that incentivize density by right, so that when you're finished describing this category, we haven't rolled all that back and now you have to create new, incentive. You're like replacing the same thing that we have, rather than sort of gathering them all up and going forward from where we are today. I feel like this is rolling backwards.
I agree, Matt. I fully agree with that.
So can I ask a question of Matt and Thomas? So how does the cluster that's being proposed not actually accomplish that?
Well,
I know that you're getting more lots under the tree. Sorry, we're kind of down a rabbit hole. Under the current tree ordinance, but with the changes of allowing additional housing types, you're effectively getting more units and overall units per acre with the provisions we have now. And
Yeah.
cluster does have a tree safe component. So I'm trying to understand. And frankly, I think there have been some community concerns over time with the tree density bonus, which seems a little confusing to have in a tree ordinance instead of in our zoning regs. So sorry, that's
right.
That's where I'm struggling. I'm going to admit I'm struggling when I hear this, and if I sound a little defensive, I'll own it.
Sure. I think all this stuff is supposed to be getting gathered together so you don't have to go to 3 different codes to figure out what your density is. And I agree with you that the tree incentives, what was happening is that was being used on not subject to plats, and the city did a text amendment to prohibit that. So you had to go through the subdivision ordinance to use any of the density incentives. The cluster that you're describing, would that require a rezoning? I'm a little, there's a lot of information we're absorbing here.
It is
cross-reference stuff.
Tremendous amount. No, Matt, no, it wouldn't. It would be by right under your current zoning.
Okay. I mean, I guess, you know, some of it's sort of a market question that you probably need to ask some builders, because if, you know, with larger single family lots, now the only way you can increase density is by going with attached product. I don't know how that responds to the market. One of the things that I think builders have been doing is trending towards narrower houses with deeper lots, because if you think about it from a construction cost infrastructure standpoint, you are spending less. I mean, when roads, you know, can be over $1,000 a foot to construct, if you can put the same square footage on a lot that's 60 feet wide instead of 70, you've just saved $10,000 or $5,000 per lot, I guess, for each side of the street. So the point that I'm just bringing up is that if, you know, somebody's looking to do, let's say, a homogeneous single family subdivision, the lot sizes that we're describing at the moment are bigger than what you can do by right now.
Right. And I want to add a little bit to this too, Laura. So what's really kind of catching my eye is that these districts are going to be applied kind of all over the city, and conservation subdivision is great if you're doing a big greenfield development somewhere, you can utilize these things. But if you're doing a small lot infill, then are you going to allow like a 4 or 5 lot infill thing to use cluster development standards? So if not, then putting 27-foot setbacks on something makes those infill developments a lot more difficult to achieve.
And Thomas and Matt, that's really helpful. And I think we maybe need to continue to work on what is something community-wide that works from an infill perspective, and how do we get it, again, it's that balance of allowing more things and yet maintaining to a certain amount the neighborhood character, and not having it, you know, I don't know quite how else to say it, but other than, you know, we have pattern and repetition, and how do you have something, what are we missing maybe that could fit into those neighborhoods without, again, looking like something that doesn't relate to those neighborhoods. And I also wanted to respond to something that we need to go back and look at, because the intent of this was never to require larger lots under our current regs or bigger setbacks. So I see some comments from Matt that we need to go back and test that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you know, for example, again, going back to the tree ordinance, we are obligated to keep 10% tree save in a single family subdivision. An incentive for that from back in 2002, when that ordinance was passed, is you automatically get 20-foot front setbacks. So by complying with a requirement that you have, you already get a shallower setback than what's described by right. So it's almost a gimme, you know. And then when you go to tree save that's in common open space, there are other benefits that you get with regard to lot size. And the more tree save you set aside, then you can go down to even smaller lot size, which is kind of like the cluster development, where you set aside environmentally sensitive areas and pack the development in where you're less environmentally sensitive. But I would just suggest going back and looking at some of those. I mean, you know, if it'd be helpful, I'm sure Thomas and I can give you guys some examples of some subdivisions that are done by right, so you can kind of see what's going on and how the dimensions work. And I understand, I think the flip side of that is not changing the lot sizes so aggressively that all the existing neighborhoods freak out because, you know, you're taking R3 and basically changing it to R5 lot dimensions. You know, you got to balance that. I understand.
Yeah, and I would say too, thanks for that. Thanks for the information, Matt. And it's, you know, as Laura said, you know, our intent in here is not really to require anything that's larger. I think, you know, the tree ordinance is something that's being worked on sort of congruent with what we're doing. So I don't think that the intent is to basically remove any additional density or, you know, flexibility in terms of lot size that's currently within the tree ordinance. I hear you that we might need to figure out ways to more clearly communicate within, you know, the neighborhood 1 districts that those things are actually available.
Okay, couple of comments about the translation of conditional districts. And I think, Eric, we're gonna have to hire you, man, because you give all the right answers. And but yes, the conditional districts are they're legally bound to certain site plan conditions and notes that were voted on by council. So to go in and just take those away through a giant zoning translation would probably not be legal. So we won't do that.
And we might look at them over time, case by case basis.
Yeah, there may be some that are so old or that the properties have already developed in a certain way that we may want to remove those conditions in the future development, but it won't be our first or probably even second priority when it comes to the zoning districts. We are, I don't know, we've scheduled this meeting until 1:30. So we're approaching that. So I just wanted to be mindful and thank you for hanging on. Typically we've been finishing by 1 o'clock, but we have a lot of conversation, good conversation today. So we can hang around for as long as it takes to get through these comments. Can somebody help me with where we left off? I don't want to skip over anyone's questions or comments. Some of them are not particularly, don't require a response.
I was going to suggest, Alan, that we may want to set up a series of meetings on topics in December. I mean, we've talked about 2 optional meetings, but it seems like things are grouping around topics where we can come back and dig in for folks who want to into some of these issues a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that's hitting me as I'm reading the comments and was all of a sudden kind of maybe an aha is, and Nate kind of, I think, alluded to this in one of his comments. So we have established neighborhoods with character that we probably don't want to say, okay, everyone has 30-foot setbacks and now all new housing is going to come in at a 10-foot setback, which really, well, maybe some people do, but then we could have totally new subdivisions in neighborhoods where we might want to allow something very different. And I'm wondering if we're trying to, I think that would be a topic I'd like to discuss with some of the folks on this call to see if, I know setbacks and lot size and some those things have really been a challenge. And I think we've been trying to match the current neighborhoods, but maybe for new neighborhoods, we don't need to match the current neighborhoods. So is there, are we missing something conceptually? But anyway, my suggestion, kind of talking off the top of my head, is that we maybe have send out to folks a series of topics and see who would be interested in joining and seeing if we can find times that work for them. What do you guys think of that idea? Okay, I can only see Thomas on here, and I saw him nodding his head. And I don't.
This is Matt. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Thumbs up from anyone on participating in something?
You're getting some positive feedback in the chat.
Yeah, I think those are good ideas. I'd be glad to help.
So I've moved along to the next slide because I think we can talk about this in our next steps slide. So Laura, do you want to cover the next steps and kind of pivot on the optional drop-in meetings maybe?
Yes, and I'm thinking of maybe we need to adjust the direction a little bit for December, and say we were requested by you guys a few meetings back to see if we could put all of the mixed use and non-residential district standards in a table. You wouldn't believe how hard that has been, but we're wrapping that up and want to send that out to everyone. I'm going to suggest we send out the neighborhood 1 zoning districts draft, and if people want to comment on it, great. But that we have the conversations, and I suspect we'll have some changes. And we will then probably follow up and adjust those drafts. I'm kind of saying this on the fly without talking to anyone. And then as we talked about, we'll set up, put some topics together and ask who's interested and see if we can't find common times for additional discussion, because this has been really helpful. I would say the one thing that's really challenging is it is hard in this environment to sit around a table with site plans or maps or whatever and to kind of sketch things out so that we all gain a common understanding. But we'll do our best to figure out how we can do that. And then in January, we'll probably talk about the neighborhood 1 districts, I'm guessing now, a little bit more. And then work on wrapping up the rest of the zoning review, which will be the general development standards, the neighborhood 2 districts, and some special districts like airport overlay. And then anticipating February through April, moving through the other components of the ordinance: subdivision, streets and infrastructure, stormwater, natural resources, and then administration of the UDO.
Hey, Laura, this is Matt again. On the bottom of this sheet, it talks about the other UDO chapters coming February, March, and April. Do each of those have spin out stakeholder processes that are happening, or what's happening? I mean, there's the potential for an overwhelming amount of information and potential change to be included in those categories. I mean, just like, what we're doing here, you amplify all that. I mean, like stormwater and natural resources, when they did the PCO ordinance back in 2006 or 7 or whenever they did all the stakeholder stuff, it took a while. Are these going to have a similar stakeholder feedback, or what's the plan?
So let's start with that one. So this really is the stakeholder group for those ordinances, and with stormwater and natural resources, the changes from what we have, not to say that there won't be any, the changes will be minimal for most elements of those. And we'll be very explicit on what is changing. I think the biggest thing is we're looking at how are we dealing with drainage in some situations as an additional chapter, and trees, which are a component of that, will, based on the tree canopy action plan, the tree regulations will be updated. So I don't want to discount the importance of what we're doing with those, but I don't want anyone to think we're kind of like throwing out the current stormwater regs or watershed regs and starting over. So it should look very familiar to you, most of it.
Okay.
Subdivision, streets, and infrastructure is so you make a very good point. This is dense stuff, and you know, we're struggling to get it all to you guys. Subdivision, streets, and infrastructure is pulling from a lot of places and a lot of different regulations, and that's probably going to be very challenging, and it may require also a lot of offline conversations. So we come to the OAC, you know, everyone gets an overview. Some people may want to dig in more, and we're doing the offline conversations with that. Administration should be relatively straightforward. A lot of that, what we're doing is set by state law, and that's going to be the rezoning process and variances and appeals and things like that. I think what won't be in the ordinance and what we're going to want to test with people over time is how we make it clear who's administering different parts of the Unified Development Ordinance. So that may have been more information than you wanted, Matt. And does that help at all?
It does. I just think that, you know, there are folks who are interested in these categories who, you know, have varying degrees of trust. And to say, don't worry about it, it'll be fine, may not go over well, especially if it's on a fast track. I think somebody made a comment about making sure that there is a track, you know, clearly tracking the changes, or, you know, a red line draft copy or something like that. The more clarity everybody can have on what is changing, I think the more comfortable everybody will be with a faster process rather than a slower process.
Matt, that's really, really fair, and particularly in those natural resources, stormwater regs. Whereas we can say the zoning is pretty much all changing. Those other things, I think we can highlight the pieces that are substantive changes. So while I think we'll keep more than likely the 3rd and the 10th for folks who just want to drop in and ask us some questions or get some additional information to help in reviewing what we're sending out to you. We'll also set up the additional meetings. December is going to be a really busy month for us, it looks like. And for some of you guys as well.
So I think we are coming to the end of our meeting time, and I was wondering if Taiwo, if you're on now, if you'd like to offer some final remarks. Well, perhaps Ty is occupied. Allison, would you like to say a few things before we close up?
Yeah, sure. Actually, so Ty wanted to close y'all out, and I just wanted to share a couple of texts he sent me in the meeting. He said, wow, the OAC members' commitment is admirable. And he said, the participation in the comments, he said, I'm totally impressed. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, this has been a great conversation. Just, you know, as I said in the beginning, just bouncing these ideas off of you and getting your feedback is critical to the development of a good document. And so just the discussions, the willingness to participate even on side meetings to help us, you know, sort through these issues and talk through them is immensely appreciated. And we just can't thank you enough. So thank you for yet again, a great discussion and great feedback, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Okay, thank you. And
thanks everybody.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you.